Welcome back, everybody, to the Lightboard studio here at Cape Fear Community College. And today, we're going to be discussing something that is of critical importance right now to our country. It's everywhere. It's omnipresent. We can find it, and sometimes it finds us. We are talking about fake news. News that is designed to promote disinformation. It is all over the place, and it's having a real, tangible impact on American politics right now. And as politics goes, so goes the government. It's having an impact on the decisions our government is making and has made over the past several years. So we're going to take a look at it, and we're going to talk about what it is, and we're going to talk about what it isn't. I actually think the best way to define something, or to begin to define something, is to talk about what fake news isn't. A lot of times when I ask students to give me an example of fake news, they will bring in something like this story from The Onion. Yeah, that's a clever headline. Obviously, this story is fictitious, but it is not fake news. It's not real, but it's satire. Political satire is as old as the Republic itself. Some of our greatest political commentators have been and are satirists. Think of Jon Stewart from The Daily Show. So, there's plenty of satire all over the place, and The Onion is probably one of everybody's favorite examples of political satire. The stories aren't designed to sway people or to make people think one way or another. They're designed to highlight something funny and offer commentary on it. Take a look at this. Take a look at this piece right here from the Washington Post. President Trump removes a bust of Martin Luther King Jr. from the Oval Office. Now, this story turned out to be false. That is not fake news. Pieces that end up being incorrect are not examples of fake news. The authors of that piece were not trying to mislead. They simply got the story wrong. So that's not fake news either. We have a famous example of somebody who bought into fake news right here from Cape Fear Community College. So I want you to take a quick look at this video, and then we'll discuss it.
One of the big surprises of the presidential campaign was the explosion of fake news on the internet, fantastic tales that some believed to be true. Well, Chip Reed reports that one phony item led to a dangerous situation in Washington.
28-year-old Edgar Welch was arrested in Washington Sunday afternoon outside Comet Ping Pong, a popular family pizza parlor. D.C. police say Welch fired at least one round into the restaurant floor with an AR-15 rifle like this one on his Facebook page. No one was injured. Police say Welch drove all the way from North Carolina to self-investigate Pizzagate, a fictitious online conspiracy theory. Pizzagate started on the internet shortly before Election Day, when right-wing sites that make up fake news spread rumors that Hillary Clinton was involved in a child sex trafficking ring in D.C. Court documents say Welch read online that the Comet restaurant was harboring child sex slaves, and he was armed to help rescue them. He surrendered peacefully when he found no evidence that underage children were being harbored in the restaurant.
Edgar Welch graduated from Cape Fear Community College. Edgar Welch was a smart, capable student who started to read things, look at things in a very different vein, in a very different way. How? Why? How does something like that happen? Well, we're going to discuss that. But first, we need to find out where it happens. Where can we find good news sources and bad news sources? And with so much information out there, how can we possibly be expected to tell the difference? I want you to take a look at this bias in media chart. All right. Now, most of what you're going to see here in the green area, you have ABC, NBC, CBS. Of course, you have NPR, you have the BBC. These are really good news sources. They're not terribly partisan. They do offer some commentary and opinion, but you can be confident when you go to these sites that you are getting good, accurate, trustworthy news. It's not until we get to the bottom of this chart where you see WorldNet Daily. These are the type of things that you're going to get at 3 o'clock in the morning from the crazy uncle, everybody's crazy uncle, with big caps saying, have you seen this? When we get down here, we get into some pretty dark and scary places. Places that Edgar Welch found himself in the fall of 2016. And we see the results of that type of radicalization. Nothing wrong with Edgar. Nothing wrong with his mind. This happens all the time. It's happened throughout history. One question I get when I get into World War II and the lead up to it, I teach history here as well. One question that I get a lot of is, why in the world would these German citizens do this? What was with the people of Germany in 1933? How could anybody listen to this man and make these decisions? And that's a really good question. And for a lot of people, their story has no impact on us. Their story has nothing to do with us because they believe that the circumstances that created 1930s Germany were unique to that time and to those people. But the truth is, anybody, anywhere, history shows, is susceptible to this type of disinformation, particularly if it is deployed with intent. And that is key when we're talking about fake news, is the intent. Fake news is deliberately intending to deceive you. And we can see in some of these videos the impact that that type of fake news had in the past when we look at the Nazi press and the Reichstag Fire. Take a look.
Night, someone had set fire to Germany's parliament.
Just now, the revolution has begun in earnest. The middle class had been repelled by the roughness and lack of polish by the Nazis. Now, they've been frightened and won over by the Reichstag Fire.
To this day, no one is certain who set the fire that destroyed the Reichstag. But Hitler knew who he would blame. His rivals, the communists. The Nazi press said that the Reichstag fire was intended as a signal for communist cells across Germany to rise up and revolt.
They wanted to send armed mobs into villages to commit murder and plunder. Hostages would be taken from the middle class. Wives and children of police officers used as human shields. The destruction of all cultural values, just like in Russia.
Hitler had invented a communist threat. Now he would use it to crush his opposition.
Of course, Nazi Germany is not the only country, the only place where propaganda, disinformation, fake news was all over the place. Fake news is not new. It's as old as time, and it has a real impact. It's not a trick. It's not a game. It is a very dangerous thing. And we have seen a lot of that recently. We see it all over the world still. We see it in Russia today. Look at this video of this girl talking about Vladimir Putin.
Earlier this year, Putin miraculously recovered 2 ancient vases from the bottom of the ocean. Fortunately, Cameras were on hand to capture this historic moment.
Я думаю, что очень много людей спускается, и мало кто находит. Это очень классно, и интересно, что именно Путин это поднял, и это очень важно. Это знак, и это не случайно. Все, единственное, что я могу это сказать.
Oh, come on! Not only is that clearly bullshit, but contrived seaside photo ops is the same publicity strategy as Taylor Swift and Tom Hiddleston. America had Hiddle Swift, Russia got Poodle Jug. Hashtag Poodle Jug. Putin's popularity, though, is...
You might laugh. You might say, oh my God, how could anybody believe that? That is not an unintelligent woman. That is a woman who has been victimized by a lack of media, by a lack of different sources of information. Now, here in the United States, we have laws that protect us from state-run media. But in some ways, our freedom of the press might be our own worst enemy because we self-select, we self-isolate. We can choose news like we choose eggs. There is an inherent danger in having too much freedom. Freedom was never meant to make us safe. It was never meant to make us perfect. It's the best option available, but it can be very dangerous. It can be very dangerous. So how can we avoid a similar fate? How can we make sure that we don't fall into these same types of traps? Well, here today, we have psychology professor Jason McCoy, Cape Fear's own, and he's going to come in here and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how fake news works, about how people react to it differently, and what, if anything, we can do to prevent this as we move forward as a country. So, Mr. McCoy, come on in, please.
How's it going, Mr. Beaulieu? Thanks for having me. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so, Jason, we're talking a little bit about fake news today.
Sure.
And, I'm really curious. I think every American has had this experience over the last 4 years. We're sitting down, maybe it's Thanksgiving, we're talking to our family, inevitably politics comes up, or we're scrolling social media, and we cannot believe how somebody could see the same event through completely different eyes. It's almost like they have their own set of facts. What's going on a psychological level here?
Well, I don't know much about that because I've never had a dinner with anyone who brought up any issue related to politics, religion, or sex. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, those are brought up. And of course, they're extraordinarily interesting topics under normal circumstances. That is, if you manage to get with people who believe things the same way you do. But unfortunately, our brains did not evolve to come to the same conclusions, right? If you take one of my classes, you'll learn really quickly that one of the major players in human decision-making, human belief-making, is perception. And it doesn't take a psychology student or a psychology professor to tell you that perception relates to our own unique way of seeing the world. That includes other people and other events. And so as such, I believe you are in fact right that people come to the same event, the same sort of set of facts or circumstances, but come away with a different decision, come away with different meaning. Now, how is it they do that? Well, the simple answer would be that not all of our past experiences are the same. Also, I believe that people find themselves in different sort of moments, different circumstances throughout life. There's some research by Jennifer Whitson that suggests that when people are feeling particularly insecure, she finds that these people under these circumstances are more likely to believe weird things, more likely to fall for things that might remind you of fake news. They're making meaning where there is none. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. The brain is flexible and limber in that way. That's a good thing to create meaning where there is none. But the sort of meaning you create can potentially have great ramifications.
So, Jason, I'm curious, would you say that there is an intelligence aspect to this? Am I more susceptible to fake news if I have a lower IQ or if I'm just not quite as smart? Or is that not the way to look at it?
I don't think that's right, or at least not the right way of looking at it. Back in 2003, when I was doing some of my own original research in this general area of what I called pseudoscience, or the belief in things for which a person has no evidence, or at least doesn't have good or sufficient scientific quality evidence, I thought that there'd be a linear relationship between this, right? So I surveyed about 500 to 700 individuals ranging across socioeconomic strata, ranging across college majors, ranging across levels of education, from people who had dropped out of high school all the way to people with PhDs. And again, I thought that the smarter you were, at least on paper, right, the less likely you would be to believe in what at the time I referred to as pseudoscience. This included things related to medical myths, conspiracy theories, and the like. Boy, was I wrong. My research showed that, contrary to my belief, people across all education levels believed, at least in some of these weird things. So there was nothing in my research that could have predicted who and under what circumstances they'd fall for this fake news, as you refer to it.
Wow. Are you saying, because it sounds like you're almost saying that you could dupe Einstein? I mean, that's the brain.
Well, that is
possible?
one interpretation or one conclusion to come to, is that anyone could be duped. But I think we have to look at this question a little more carefully. Robert Sternberg, the great intelligence researcher out of Yale, about 30 years ago, said this about weird beliefs. He said, anyone can believe weird things. So anyone can fall for fake news. It's just that formally educated, smarter people typically give more advanced, more cognitively sophisticated, maybe more convincing and logical reasons. What this suggests is that it's not really the person delivering the fake news. It's not the media source that's showing us the fake news that's doing the work. The heavy lifting of believing anything is going on inside our brains. So, sure, if Einstein wanted to believe something, he probably could come up with some pretty good reasons for doing so. In fact, many people throughout history that we've deemed some of the greatest thinkers dabbled in some things that by today's standards we'd say, man, they were really off the mark. Again, take someone like Thomas Edison, who was really into alchemy. For those of you at home that have never heard of alchemy, it's this idea that you can turn one type of metal or one type of substance into something more precious, like maybe gold. And so Edison spent a lot of time trying to do this throughout his career.
Hadn't that idea fallen out of favor by that time?
Well, it had fallen out of favor by maybe mainstream. But that's just it, isn't it? If you're extraordinarily smart, if you think of yourself as a very critical thinker, if you think of yourself as one of the 1%ers in terms of intellectual capacity, it's not that easy to give up on some ideas. Perhaps other people have just simply missed it. And maybe by investigating it, keeping the idea going in your own sort of unique and special mind, maybe you can discover something that wasn't otherwise yet discovered. I mean, heavier than air flying machines were once thought to be nothing but magic. Some of the greatest thinkers of our time believed that it was impossible, not just improbable, but impossible to design something heavier than air that would stay afloat. And of course, if you look around, you see helicopters and planes and jets all over the place.
Jason, we got to spend a couple minutes here and talk about the big lie. It's really a big series of lies. There is a pervasive belief among millions of our citizens that the election in 2020 was not on the up and up, that the election was stolen. Now, asked 42 separate times in 42 separate court hearings to produce evidence to this effect, there was zero. And yet the belief persists. I want to take a quick look at this video.
There's gotta be something here we can fucking use against these scumbags. That's what we fucking need to have 30,000 guns on there. That's what we need. Let's go!
thousands upon thousands of our citizens chanting, screaming, storming the Capitol of the United States, all on a belief that has no bearing in reality. Yet they believe it with every fiber of their being. I mean, to be able to do that, they're not playing. You see one of those guys just searching for evidence, for the evidence. It's got to be here, he says. It's got to be here. How is that possible? And I guess I would like to know, what can we do about it?
Well, I think most people's gut reaction when they see something like this is that, man, the world's out of control, or at least half the population has fallen under a spell. Those seem to be the two easiest and best ways to sort of conclude what's going on. I will admit that throughout the past 4 or 5 years, I've been thinking that it's possible, more and more possible, that there is a mental illness that is somehow befalling many, many citizens. But if I'm being honest, if I'm being intellectually consistent, I would say that it's probably best to think about this in the same way you think about a question that I often ask my students. Now, bear with me. I'll oftentimes ask my students, sometimes after the first class, sometimes after the midterm, sometimes at the end of the semester, who is your favorite psychology instructor? And inevitably, even when I ask them anonymously, they will write Jason McCoy. And of course, as much as I'd love to believe this is true, and as easy as it is for me to explain, because there's miles and miles of evidence to support their notion, I can't help but wonder what on earth could possibly lead them to believe this. I haven't done anything sinister. I haven't given them any kind of drugs throughout the semester. I haven't made them drink any kind of Kool-Aid, right? I'm not a cult leader. I'm not trying to bring in the masses like a cult. I'm just simply doing the best job I can. And honestly, as much as I'd like to believe I'm the best, I know that I'm not, right? I probably wasn't even trained by the best. So I think what happens is people will start with a conclusion, right? They'll just start with the conclusion that I'm the best. It's easier to do that. It doesn't take a lot of heavy intellectual lifting to just search through your memory of your experiences. And if I'm the only person teaching psychology that you've ever experienced, or I found the latest iteration that you've experienced, then it's just easier for you to say, you are. To come full circle, how is it that people could fall for such a insidious and patently obvious lie? I think the answer lies in whether or not people start with a question or they start with a conclusion. You see, if you start with a question, then the next sort of plausible step in that process is to go looking for an answer. Looking for an answer. If you start with an answer or a conclusion, like Mr. McCoy's the best psych instructor, or worse, much worse, the last presidential election was stolen, then instead of looking for an answer, you'll simply go and look for evidence to support it. As you were mentioning, one of those guys in the Capitol searching around desperately for some smoking gun.
That he was sure was there.
That he was sure was there.
Yeah, so for those of us like myself who think that the country as a whole has sort of stayed too long at the fair, we want to get off the merry-go-round. We want to get back to some sort of sense of normalcy. Would you say we shouldn't be looking at liberalism? We shouldn't be looking at conservatism. The ideology maybe that the country needs is curiosity. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think so. And we need a lot of that. In fact, we need to be curious, not about why people believe what they believe, or who is it in our neighborhood, or who is it in our social group, or our social online network that believes these things, including but not limited to, I am the best instructor of psychology, or that Donald Trump's election was stolen. But instead, we need to be curious about who our neighbors are. What kinds of things connect us? What kinds of things do we have in common?
All right, sounds good. So it sounds like, our laws are set up so as to limit the government's ability to dig into freedom of the press, to withhold And based on what I'm hearing from you, it almost sounds like the brain is, in some respects, when it comes to politics, both our best friend, but also our own worst enemy.
I think that's right.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. I really appreciate you stopping by and talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Have a
Thank
good
you
one.
guys for watching.
Bye, guys. Enjoy the rest of your spring break.